I was halfway through reviewing a compliance report when I opened the spreadsheet that wasn't meant for me. A compensation file from HR slipped into my inbox like any other attachment. I almost ignored it. Almost. I clicked it open, expecting some generic headcount tracker. Instead, a neatly formatted sheet loaded on my screen. Larkin Systems Strategy Division. Incoming hires, compensation overview. My eyes skimmed lazily past the names, universities, start dates, onboarding notes. Then they hit the numbers and stopped cold. Each of the 4 new hires, fresh out of grad school, barely old enough to rent a car, was making $20,000 more than me. $20,000 more. After 18 years. For a moment, I honestly thought I'd misread it. I blinked, zoomed in, checked the columns twice. Base salary, bonus band, total comp. The numbers didn't change. My throat tightened, heat pushing up behind my eyes. 18 years of building Larkin's regulatory frameworks from scratch. 18 years of late nights and weekend emergencies. 3 CEOs, 2 restructurings, 1 merger that nearly gutted the company, and I was still earning less than 4 people who hadn't even found the restrooms yet. I stared at the screen so long, my reflection started to blur in the glass. By the time I marched into HR, my hands were shaking, but my voice wasn't. "Olivia, we need to talk," I said, dropping into the chair across from her. Olivia Tran, Director of Human Resources, didn't even pretend to be surprised. She just folded her hands, expression smooth and practiced, like she'd been waiting for this conversation. "I saw the comp sheet for the new strategy hires," I said. "They're making $20,000 more than I am." Her gaze didn't flicker. "Market conditions evolve, Maya," she replied, tapping her pen on the desk like she was reading from a script. "You were hired at a different time. We can't retroactively adjust your salary to match new hires." I swallowed hard. "Then promote me." "No openings," she said, too quickly. "Then create one." That finally earned me a thin, brittle smile. Be realistic. Realistic. Realistic, like training 2 entire departments after the merger for no extra pay. Realistic, like working 70-hour weeks last winter because they refused to replace a senior analyst who quit. Realistic, like being called indispensable in every performance review and not quite ready for every promotion. I walked out of HR, numb, humiliated, and angrier than I'd been in years. The hallway felt different, colder, smaller, like the building had suddenly shrunk around me. That night, sitting alone in my apartment, surrounded by 18 years of Larkin lanyards, plaques, and binders labeled critical systems, one thought wouldn't let go. If this was what they were paying me, what else were they hiding? I opened my laptop, pulled up my old email archives, and started to dig. I didn't sleep that night. The spreadsheet was still burned into my retinas, the numbers replaying every time I closed my eyes. 20,000 more. For people who didn't know the systems, didn't know the history, didn't know the cost of keeping the place running when everything broke. Sometime after midnight, I gave up on rest and opened my laptop again. If this wasn't a mistake, there would be traces. Decisions like that don't happen in a vacuum. I logged into my old email archives, the ones no one ever cleaned up because storage is cheap and legacy data isn't a priority. Years of threads loaded slowly. Conversations from past executives, former managers, people who had long since moved on with golden exits and glowing LinkedIn posts. I searched broadly at first. Compensation, retention, salary bands. Hundreds of results appeared. Then one subject line made my hands go cold. Retention Cost Strategy. The date stamped beside it read 7 years ago, back when the company was still growing fast, back when leadership talked endlessly about loyalty and culture and building something together. I clicked. The sender was the former CFO, Marcus Alden. His message was brief, clinical, almost academic. Employees with long tenure demonstrate high loyalty indicators. Recommend suppressing salary adjustments for individuals exceeding 10 years. Strong cultural fit. Low turnover risk. New hires may exceed legacy compensation bands. Long-term staff unlikely to leave. I felt my pulse in my ears. I scrolled down. A reply appeared beneath it. Olivia Tran, newly promoted to HR director at the time. The woman who had looked me in the eye earlier that day and told me to be realistic. Agreed. Maintain minimal increases for legacy employees. They are emotionally invested and cost-efficient to retain at current levels. Emotionally invested. Cost-efficient. The words made my stomach turn. They weren't rewarding loyalty. They were exploiting it, weaponizing it, counting on the fact that people like me had built our lives around the company, around the stability we believed we'd earned. Counting on us to stay quiet, grateful, patient. I scrolled through the thread again, slower this time. No hesitation, no debate, just agreement and execution. This wasn't a temporary measure. It was policy, deliberate, strategic. I leaned back in my chair, breathing shallow. The apartment suddenly too quiet. Memories flooded in. Missed birthdays, canceled vacations, nights sleeping on office couches while everyone else went home. All of it reframed in an instant. Not sacrifice, investment. And they had been collecting interest for years. By morning, the anger had settled into something colder and sharper. I drove south to the old marina, the place I went when I needed air. Fog rolled over the water as I sat on a splintered bench, staring at the horizon, replaying the last 18 years in a new light. Every raise denied, every promise delayed, every compliment that cost them nothing. By the time I stood up to leave, the decision was already made. I wasn't going to beg anymore, and I wasn't going to stay silent. By Saturday afternoon, the shock had faded. In its place was something far more dangerous focus. I knew what I'd found wasn't just about me. If the company had formalized a strategy to suppress pay for long-term employees, then I wasn't the exception. I was the rule. I thought about who else had been there long enough to notice the pattern. Who had watched the same waves of new hires come in at higher salaries, the same vague promises of next cycle and future opportunities. One name stood out immediately. Daniel Ruiz, head of infrastructure operations, 17 years in. The man who fixed problems no one else understood and never complained about the hours it took. If anyone had seen what I was seeing, it was him. I texted him once. Need to talk. Sensitive. Can you meet me at Harbor Point Cafe in 20 minutes? The reply came back almost instantly. Yeah, sounds serious. He looked exhausted when he arrived, like someone who had spent too many years holding systems together with duct tape while leadership applauded from a safe distance. We ordered coffee and sat in silence until I slid my phone across the table. Read this, I said. His eyes moved slowly as he scrolled through the email chain, the CFO, HR, the language so detached it might as well have been written about machines instead of people. When he finished, he let out a single, sharp breath. I knew something was wrong, he muttered. The new cloud analyst makes more than I do, and I trained him. I nodded. I don't think it's isolated. I think it's company-wide. Daniel leaned back, jaw tight. Then you're going to need proof. Not emails. Data. Numbers no one can spin. That was exactly what I'd been hoping he'd say. We talked quietly, heads close, the cafe buzzing around us like it was any other afternoon. Nothing illegal, nothing reckless. Just information that already existed, pulled together in a way leadership never intended. That analytics audit tool you built during the merger, he said. It can generate anonymous salary comparisons by tenure, department, market rate. Totally legitimate if framed as a resource allocation review. I stared at him. You'd actually do that? He didn't hesitate. After 17 years? Absolutely. We left separately, careful, calm. By Sunday evening, a file appeared in my inbox. I sat there for a long moment before opening it, already knowing what I'd find, and knowing my life at the company was about to change forever. I braced myself before opening the file Daniel sent. Even after everything I had uncovered, some part of me still hoped I was wrong, that the truth would be smaller, easier to dismiss. I clicked anyway. The report loaded clean and brutal in its simplicity. Rows of names stripped of identifiers. Tenure columns stretching from 5 years to 25. Salary bands compared against current market rates. Difference percentages highlighted in red. My chest tightened as I scrolled. It wasn't a pattern. It was a blueprint. Nearly everyone with more than 8 years at the company was underpaid by a lot. 32% below market. 38. 44. Some employees were earning $50,000 less than someone with half their experience hired last year. Entire departments showed the same distortion. New hires at or above market, long-term staff systematically capped far below it. There were no outliers that favored loyalty. Not one. I sat perfectly still, the glow of the screen filling the room as the last sliver of doubt evaporated. This wasn't HR oversight. This wasn't bad timing. It was policy executed year after year with precision. What surprised me wasn't the anger. It was the clarity. The tightness in my chest eased, replaced by something colder and steadier. I finally understood why promotions stalled, why raises never matched reviews, why gratitude was always verbal and never financial. The system had been designed to keep people like us exactly where we were, productive, quiet, and cheap. I closed the report and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. For the first time since opening that spreadsheet, I stopped asking why. I already had the answer. The only real question left was what I was going to do with it. By the time evening came, the decision felt inevitable. Monday wasn't just another workday anymore. It was a deadline. And whatever happened next, the company wouldn't be able to pretend this was a misunderstanding again. Monday came faster than it should have. I'd been awake since before dawn, lying still in the dark, replaying the numbers in my head until they stopped feeling like data and started feeling like testimony. By 5 a.m., resistance faded. This wasn't fear anymore. It was resolve. At 5:25, I pulled into the nearly empty parking lot, the office building rising out of the darkness like it always had, glass, steel, and quiet authority. I'd driven this route for almost 2 decades. Same turns, same stoplight. But every familiar landmark felt sharpened, as if the city itself knew something was about to break. The security guard at the front desk glanced up when I swiped my badge. "Early morning," he said. "Big one," I replied, surprised at how calm my voice sounded. The building hummed softly, HVAC vents breathing, servers idling. No meetings, no chatter. Just a space that hadn't yet realized its balance was about to shift. I didn't stop at my desk. I headed straight for the executive floor. The corner office door was unlocked, just like it always was. Leadership liked to believe trust replaced locks. I stepped inside and approached the leather chair behind the desk Ethan Cole, CEO, a man who loved metrics, efficiency, and calling the company a family. I placed a sealed envelope on the seat. Inside was everything they never expected from me. A one-page resignation letter, effective immediately. A printed copy of the 7-year-old retention cost strategy emails. A bound summary of the salary disparity report Daniel had generated. And a final handwritten note. Loyalty is not a discount. I didn't wait. I didn't linger. I didn't need to. Back at my desk, I powered on my computer one last time. My hands didn't shake as I drafted a new email addressed not to leadership, not to HR, but to everyone with 8 or more years of service. 62 names. People who had built the place quietly. People who had been told to be patient. The subject line read, "You deserve to know the truth." I attached the data, the emails, a clear explanation of how long-term employees had been systematically underpaid. My finger hovered over the send button. Fear whispered every consequence I'd ever been warned about. But something stronger answered back. 18 years of silence finally finding its voice. I clicked send. The quiet ping echoed louder than any alarm. I didn't stay long after that. Once the email left my outbox, there was nothing more to say inside that building. I logged off, stood slowly, and walked out to the parking lot as the first hint of sunrise scraped the edges of the sky. The air felt sharper, clearer, as if the city itself had taken a breath. I sat in my car across the street from the building, engine off, watching the glass facade reflect the growing light. At 6:58 a.m., the executive floor lights flickered on. 2 minutes later, a figure paused inside the corner office. Even from a distance, I could tell the moment Ethan Cole discovered the envelope. The sudden stillness. The way his shoulders stiffened. The way time seemed to hesitate around him. My phone vibrated. One notification, then another, then a third. By 7:15, it wasn't vibrating anymore. It was buzzing non-stop. Messages stacked on top of each other, names I recognized immediately. Is this real? I've been underpaid for years. They told me it was budget limits. I can't stop shaking. I didn't respond. Not yet. I watched instead as the parking lot filled, employees streaming in with coffee cups and laptop bags, unaware their workday had already detonated before it began. At 7:22, the blinds in Ethan's office snapped shut so hard I saw them from my car. Good. Then my phone rang. "Maya," Ethan said, his voice controlled in the way people sound when they're barely holding rage back. "Get back here. Now." "No," I replied simply. "You've distributed confidential compensation data," he snapped. "You've put the company and me at serious risk." "You put everyone else at risk years ago," I said. "I just turned on the lights." Silence stretched across the line, cold and heavy. "What do you want?" he finally asked. "A correction," I said. "Transparency, accountability." There was a pause, then, softer. "Your job back. A promotion. A payout." I smiled to myself. I already resigned. "That resignation isn't valid." "It's sitting on your chair." The line went dead. By the time I ended the call, employees were clustering just inside the doors, phones raised, whispers spreading floor to floor. Groups formed, screenshots were shared. The truth had weight now, and it was pulling people together. At 8:10, an internal alert lit up my screen. Mandatory all-hands meeting, 9 a.m., auditorium. Ethan wanted control back. He wouldn't get it. Once people see the truth, you can't stuff it back into silence again. By the time I walked into the auditorium at exactly 9 a.m., the air inside felt charged electric in a way I'd never experienced there before. Every seat was filled. People stood along the walls, clustered in aisles, leaning forward like they were bracing for impact. The low roar of voices rose and fell, restless and sharp. I slipped into a seat near the back, hood pulled low. I didn't belong there anymore, but I needed to see what would happen when the truth collided with the company's carefully crafted narrative. At 9:02, Ethan Cole stepped onto the stage. He expected silence. He got something else entirely. Boos echoed from the first rows, spreading quickly, growing louder. These weren't outsiders. These were engineers, analysts, managers, people who had spent 10, 15, 20 years building the company he now stood in front of. Ethan raised a hand, trying to quiet the room. No one complied. Beside him, Olivia Tran reached for the microphone. "Please," she said, forcing a smile. "We need to maintain professionalism. Compensation structures are complex, and there's clearly been a misunderstanding."
"Misunderstanding?" a voice shouted from the third row. "You hid raises for years!"
Another voice followed. "You paid new grads more than the people who trained them." Someone yelled, louder than the rest.
"You used loyalty as a discount! Say it!"
Olivia froze. Ethan stepped forward, jaw tight.
"What was circulated this morning was incomplete information sent by an employee acting out of emotion rather than reason."
That was when the room erupted. Not chaos laughter. Harsh, bitter, disbelieving laughter that rolled through the seats like a wave.
"We have the emails," someone shouted. "And the data," another added.
I saw it then, the brief crack in Ethan's composure. He knew exactly which emails they meant. The ones on his chair. The ones spreading through inboxes faster than damage control could keep up.
"We will conduct an internal review,"
Ethan said, voice stiff,
"to determine which documents were misinterpreted and how they were obtained."
A man stood up near the front, gray-haired, calm. He'd been there longer than most people in leadership. "No more spin," he said quietly, and the room fell still. Why were long-term employees intentionally kept below market rate? Why were raises denied while executives took bonuses? And why did new hires make more than the people who trained them? The question landed like a blade. Murmurs of agreement rippled outward. Phones lifted, screens recorded. Olivia tried again. "Please."
"Not this time," someone snapped. "Where's the board?" another voice demanded.
Ethan stiffened, unavailable. That was his mistake. The room didn't dissolve into shouting. It organized. People leaned together, sharing screenshots, forwarding files, forming groups. I watched in real time as Redwood lost something far more valuable than control of the narrative. They lost ownership of the truth. My phone buzzed in my pocket. One message. "Daniel, they know it was you. They're coming after you next. Be ready." I stood quietly and slipped out the side door. The rebellion had already taken on a life of its own. The door closed behind me with a soft click, sealing off the roar of the auditorium. Out in the hallway, everything felt strangely calm. Too calm. Like the moment just before a storm breaks. My phone buzzed again. A single line from Daniel sat on the screen. "Security's looking for you. HR's panicking." Of course they were. Redwood had always followed the same playbook. Silence the loyal, discredit the inconvenient, make an example of anyone who disrupted the balance. And now, for the first time, that playbook had been turned outward. I didn't run.
I walked quickly, head down, toward my old workstation. The executive floor was nearly empty, a handful of early arrivals frozen at their desks, staring at their screens as messages poured in. No one stopped me. No one spoke. They were watching the same collapse from the inside. At my desk, I sat carefully, almost ceremonially. 18 years distilled into a chair, a keyboard, a familiar hum of monitors. This place had taken more of me than I ever admitted, but it didn't own me anymore. The moment I logged in, 2 alerts appeared. Account flagged for security review. Access privileges updated by administrator. They were coming fast now. I didn't hesitate. The compliance system had a flaw I'd documented twice during mergers, flagged as low priority because fixing it didn't affect quarterly numbers. Any creator of a project retained mirrored, read-only access even after removal from active systems. And I had created hundreds of critical files. I opened the mirrored archive and navigated straight to the compliance repository. Training manuals, audit frameworks, regulatory maps, risk assessments. Years of institutional knowledge the company relied on but never valued properly. I selected everything. A small script Daniel had once shown me ran clean and silent. Compress, encrypt, export to external cloud storage. The progress bar barely had time to move. Then the screen flashed. You have been signed out by a remote administrator. I closed the laptop gently. Footsteps echoed at the far end of the hallway. Security. Too late. I stood, slipped my bag over my shoulder, and headed toward the opposite exit. As I passed a glass conference room, I caught sight of Olivia Tran, pacing the floor with her phone pressed hard to her ear, gestures sharp and frantic. She didn't see me. Outside, sunlight hit my face like a release. I reached my car just as 2 security guards burst through the front doors, scanning the lot. Not today. My phone buzzed again. Daniel. Board's an emergency session. All of them. Even the ones who never show up. I smiled. Redwood had finally realized the truth. This wasn't damage control anymore. It was survival. I didn't drive home. Instead, I headed for the overlook above Redwood's campus, the same quiet hill where I used to eat lunch years ago, back when the company still felt like a shared dream instead of a machine. From there, the entire building spread out below me, sunlight flashing off the glass like warning signals. My phone buzzed almost immediately. Daniel, they're all here, the full board, even the remote members. That alone said everything. Boards didn't gather like this for misunderstandings. They assembled when something threatened the foundation. A moment later, another message came through. They're calling it a containment emergency. HR is trying to track who forwarded your email. I leaned back against my car and exhaled slowly. Redwood still thought exposure was the problem, not the system underneath it. That mistake would cost them. At 9:58, Daniel called me. His voice was low, controlled. "You need to hear this," he said. "I'm outside the boardroom. The soundproofing's a joke." "Go on." Ethan's spiraling. He's blaming HR, blaming legacy policies, saying it was all misunderstood. Daniel paused. The board isn't buying it. I smiled faintly. Boards don't care about loyalty speeches. They care about risk. "They want to talk to you," Daniel added. "Directly." My pulse spiked. "Today?" "Immediately. They're calling it corporate risk mitigation." In other words, fear. Before I could respond, another notification appeared. Unknown number. I opened it. "Miss Carter, this is Rebecca Sloan, Chair of Redwood Dynamics Board. We request a meeting with you today at 12 p.m., neutral location. Please confirm. They weren't asking permission. They were trying to regain leverage without admitting they'd lost it. Daniel spoke again. Whatever you decide, don't go alone. I won't, I said, though we both understood what that meant. I wasn't walking into anything without preparation. I typed a short reply. I'll be there. As I started the engine, watching the building hum with panic below, one thing was clear. For the first time in 18 years, Redwood Dynamics wasn't in control of the timeline. I was. I arrived 10 minutes early. The meeting location was exactly what the board had promised, neutral, polished, designed to feel calm even when everything else was on fire. A glass-walled business lounge overlooking the river, where city sounds softened into background noise and important decisions were usually made in hushed tones. Today, that calm was an illusion. At 11:59 sharp, the door opened. 3 people stepped inside. Rebecca Sloan, chair of the board. Thomas Green, finance director. Dr. Evelyn Park, head of risk and compliance. 1 seat remained empty. Ethan Carver was nowhere to be seen. Rebecca offered her hand. Ms. Carter, thank you for coming. I'm here because you asked for clarity, I replied as we sat. So ask. Rebecca folded her hands. You've created significant legal, financial, and reputational exposure for Redwood Dynamics. I met her gaze. I didn't create it. I exposed it. Silence stretched across the table. Dr. Park leaned forward first. The documents you distributed, are they authentic? Yes. Unaltered? Yes. Thomas's eyes narrowed. Do you still possess copies? I do. That was the real shift the moment they realized the leverage had changed. No speeches, no spin, just risk assessment. Rebecca exhaled slowly. We need to understand your intent. My intent, I repeated, letting the words hang, was to stop a system that exploited loyalty and buried accountability. And what do you want now? She asked. I left my terms with the CEO, I said. Full market corrections for long-term employees, retroactive pay, transparent salary bands, and a public acknowledgement. Thomas scoffed. You're asking us to rewrite 8 years of compensation strategy. No, I said calmly. I'm asking you to undo 8 years of theft. His posture stiffened. Dr. Park spoke carefully. A public admission could trigger litigation. You're already exposed, I replied. Your employees have the emails, the data. You can't bury this again. The room went very still. Rebecca finally nodded. We're prepared to negotiate. I shook my head and stood. I'm not. 3 sets of eyes snapped up. You had 18 years to negotiate with me, I continued. Now, you have 4 hours. What happens in 4 hours? Rebecca asked. At 4 p.m., everything goes to the Department of Labor unless you announce the corrections yourselves first. Their faces drained of color as I gathered my bag and walked out. They were no longer managing a problem. They were racing a clock. When I stepped out into the noon sun, something inside me settled. Not relief, not triumph. Alignment. For the first time in years, my thoughts, my actions, and my values were finally pointed in the same direction. I drove 2 blocks away to a small corner cafe and ordered a black coffee I barely touched. From my table, I had a clear view of the large clock mounted behind the counter. 12:07 p.m. 3 hours and 53 minutes left. My phone buzzed constantly, group chats exploding, screenshots flying, speculation layered on top of panic. I scanned none of it. Watching the clock felt more honest.
At 12:41, a news alert flashed across my screen.
Breaking. Redwood Dynamics under internal review following compensation data leak.
The article was thin, cautious, but the headline alone carried weight. Investors would read it. So would regulators.
Good.
At 1:03, a message from Olivia Tran appeared. Maya, please call me. We can resolve this without escalating further. I didn't reply. She didn't want resolution. She wanted distance from consequences.
At 1:28, Daniel called. You won't believe this. Ethan ordered a forensic audit to track the source. They can't tie anything to you, not with the mirrored access flaw. He's yelling.
Threatening people.
Of course he is, I said.
Desperation always looks the same. I typed one line and sent it back. Tell him to check his chair again. Daniel responded seconds later. You left something else, didn't you? I didn't answer.
By 2 p.m., employees were gathering in visible clusters on every floor of the building. Someone leaked a short video Ethan storming out of a conference room, face red, composure gone. He didn't look like a CEO. He looked like a man watching the ground collapse beneath his feet. At 2:37, a message from Rebecca Sloan arrived.
We request an extension, I replied calmly. You have 1 hour and 23 minutes.
At 3:10, my phone rang again, this time from a colleague I hadn't expected.
Maya, Rachel said softly, voice shaking. Thank you. A lot of us thought the problem was us. You changed that. My grip tightened around the phone.
You never deserved this, I told her. At 3:57 p.m., I opened the email addressed to the Department of Labor. Attachments ready.
3 minutes left. Redwood's window was closing.
At exactly 4 p.m., my phone vibrated once, sharp, decisive.
Redwood Dynamics Board of Directors.
Subject: Compensation restructure announcement. Effective immediately.
I opened it slowly, reading every line twice.
Not because I didn't understand it, but because I wanted to be sure it was real. Effective immediately, Redwood Dynamics would implement a full compensation restructuring. Market rate adjustments for long-term employees. Retroactive back pay. Transparent salary bands going forward. Oversight by an independent third-party ethics and compliance firm.
Everything I had demanded. Everything they had insisted was impossible. A strange quiet settled over me. Not celebration, not satisfaction, but something deeper.
The sound a lock makes when it finally aligns after years of grinding against the wrong mechanism.
Messages flooded in. They did it. We finally have answers. Thank you for not backing down. Then one message stopped me cold. People are crying in the hallways. Happy tears. You should know that.
I set the phone face down on the table and stared out the cafe window. The river reflected the late afternoon sun, indifferent and steady. Cars passed, people laughed. The world moved forward like it always had, except now, I wasn't anchored to a system that had quietly drained me dry.
My phone buzzed again. Daniel.
Ethan resigned, effective immediately. HR is under formal investigation. The board wants to meet tomorrow. They're asking if you'd consider returning in a senior leadership role.
I laughed softly. Not bitter. Not angry. Just clear.
Returning to rebuild the same structure that thrived on silence. To save a system that only corrected itself when exposed? No.
I typed 2 words. I won't.
Walking out of the cafe, the air felt warmer, lighter, like the end of a storm that had taken years to form. Redwood would rebuild. People would heal. policies would change. But not because of loyalty, not because of obedience.
Because someone finally said enough.
And sometimes, that's all it takes to reset an entire system.
That evening, I walked home slowly, letting the city noise settle around me.
For the first time in 18 years, I wasn't carrying the invisible weight of proving my worth to someone else. Redwood dynamics no longer defined my value, and in truth, it never had.
Loyalty, I realized, is not measured by how much you endure in silence. It's measured by how willing you are to stand up when silence becomes a form of harm. I hadn't broken the company. The truth had simply exposed what was already broken. Messages continued to arrive for days. Stories from people who stayed too long, hoped too quietly, blamed themselves for a system designed to hold them down. If my story sounds familiar, know this. The problem was never you. Your time matters. Your experience matters. And your courage matters most of all. If this resonated with you, tell me where you're listening from and what your experience has been. Your voice deserves space here. And if you believe more people need to hear stories like this, stay with us, share, comment, and subscribe. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't staying loyal. It's refusing to stay silent.